Hi, it's Jim from TrekWorld. Today I want to take a special look at the special effects of Star Trek. Published in 1988 by our friends at Files Magazine, it's a rather unique document that if you don't own, you definitely want to pick up. As a reminder, if there are items in this video that you are interested in purchasing, there will be affiliate links that you can find in the description. Additionally, please consider supporting this channel. The easiest way to do so is to press the join button on any video. For a mere 99 cents a month, it will get you access to private community messages, prioritized response to comment, exclusive live streams, and access to videos that have not been released yet to the public. The original price was like $5. You can probably find this on eBay or Amazon for well under $15 a piece if you spend a little bit of time looking for them. The most amazing thing for me is it was actually talking most about the work that was done around Star Trek the Motion Picture. But it took a very unique approach to it. It's a series of interviews, I believe about 4 of them that we'll step through very briefly here in a moment. And they interviewed each person basically saying, tell me about what you did. How'd you get into Hollywood? How did you get attached to Star Trek? What was it you did in the film? And the first person they talked to is a gentleman by the name of Syd Mead. And I believe I've heard the name before, but then again, hey, the boomer brain gets a little bit foggy sometimes when you're trying to remember things from 40-some years ago that you read in a Starlog. I'm certain that he was mentioned in Starlog, but of all the names that are in this book, he's the name that I didn't really remember having any attachment to Star Trek to. And that's one of the reasons why I absolutely love these kind of books, because they either remind me of things I've long since forgotten, or actually show me for the first time a glimpse into something I had never seen before. And this book does all of that and more. So it interviews Syd, and Syd was basically a production designer, and I'm sorry if I'm using the wrong description, but basically you're looking at concept drawings, tempera paintings, and drawings done for the series. This is where, a la Matt Jeffries, this is where you begin your journey in pre-production and go forward from there. So they interview Syd, and he has a lot of really interesting information that explains what he did in Star Trek. And I'm not going to go completely over it, but he basically got involved fairly early on and did probably most of Star Trek towards the end of filming. I think the VJ work had been preliminarily done and they needed some other stuff done towards the end. But it goes over to here, and if it weren't for magazines like this, or for pamphlets, booklets like this, folks like Syd could be forgotten into the mist of time. The fact of the matter is, most of us just tend to forget things as we get older, and we remember the more prominent names. And speaking of prominent names, the next person definitely rings a bell. Mr. Mike Miner. I know, no photograph of Mike, just a photograph of the Enterprise. Not quite sure why. All right, so they tell the story of Mike Miner, and Mike Miner actually began to get involved with Star Trek well before I realized as a fan that he was. He did his first drawings all the way back in 1967 for Gene and Desilu, but it got him in the door and began his career. And Mike continued to work with Star Trek all the way up through Star Trek the Motion Picture and beyond. If you have any videos, photos, or documents that you would like to donate to us, please feel free to send them to Jim at trek-world.com or submit them via the web at submit.trek-world.com. My original memory probably of him before this was that he was an artist. I mean, if you remember the original Star Trek Phase 2 Enterprise drawings, if you remember the original Enterprise paintings and drawings that came up from In Thy Image in Star Trek Phase 2 were his, designed in conjunction with, discussion with our friend Matt Jeffries, who was currently at the time on Little House on the Prairie and not available to work on Star Trek. So Mike took the original design, extrapolated what he thought it would look like based off of discussions that had been had during the time that Matt did give some advice on what the Enterprise should look like in this period. And the first color paintings came out were all Mike Miner, the blue painting with the Enterprise coming at you or whatever. You can definitely tell the Mike Miner paintings because the nacelles are thinner and they don't quite look the way you and I would expect them to, but that image made it all over the place. It was used in movie posters and in advertising print. It was pretty much everywhere. So Mike got started much earlier than I thought he did with Star Trek, but he definitely became somewhat of a household name amongst Star Trek people right around the mid-1970s. Amazing. And again, another nice set of interviews, very specific questions about what he did, how he got involved. I recommend it highly. Now, the next name in this book, in the associated interview, is somewhat of a little bit of a controversial name. It's Brick Price Miniatures. Now, most of you may remember that they were associated with the work that was done by Robert Abel and Associates in Star Trek before Robert Abel was shown the front door and they brought in Doug Trumbull to complete the effects. Brick Price was involved pretty heavily with a lot of the things that our friends at Abel did. It was the Brick Price miniature people that shredded the D7 Klingon ship on loan from the Smithsonian and never even bothered to put it back together again. They just sent it back in pieces to the Smithsonian. Okay, it is them that some people believe that the 3-foot model disappeared through, although nobody's been able to prove that as of yet. I did, however, find it very, very interesting that the 3-foot model clearly seems to me, when you look at the pictures of the recovered version, that there are like epoxy seams or globs of God knows what that they use to reattach the nacelles onto the pylons onto the secondary hull. So when I look at the 3-foot model and I see those like weld points against where the two pieces joined, I'm reminded quite vividly of the fact that the company that we did know was very fond of tearing apart models was in fact Brick Price. And so circumstantial evidence indicates that if it wasn't Brick Price, it was somebody who needed to take it apart for the exact same reason, which was to gather the dimensions of the pieces. And obviously putting it back together, not a very good job, but I guess it could have been worse. They could have just simply shipped the box back in pieces like they did the Klingon D7. However, the interview with Brick Price is definitely something you want to read. It gives me more information about what happened, how he was involved after Able was kicked off the project. Okay, you know you liked the video, so go ahead and do me a favor. Click that like button so that YouTube will know to show this video to more people. And even more importantly, the degree of which they were used in Star Trek The Motion Picture astounds me. He said they were responsible for about 1,200 of the props that were actually used in the production. And so that one caught me off guard, simply because I guess I had been looking at the story of the special effects of Star Trek The Motion Picture through decidedly anti-rose-colored glasses, and remember all the bad things and not the good. But for turning out that number of screen-used props, that was no small feat, and Brick Price needs to be recognized for being able to step up and do that. I mean, that's probably the single most Herculean effort I've heard of associated with the first movie and a specific individual or group. And last but not least, they talk about Greg Jean. Now, Greg Jean is probably the most well-known name that was covered in this interview book, and there's a reason for that. He's been around the Star Trek universe since the 1960s. He was a marvelous illustrator and incredibly talented designer of props, and as a result, his fingerprints are all over Star Trek, pretty much almost from day one, but shortly thereafter, I'm certain. It tells his story of how he got involved, and it also chronicles some of the things that he did outside of Star Trek. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is probably the one that jumps out to me the most, although obviously it's neither the beginning nor the end. And there's not a whole lot in there that it's going to tell you about him that you didn't know. Greg Jean was far more involved with science fiction movies than you can possibly imagine, in all honesty. He was involved with such incredible projects as Dark Star, Flash Gordon, Laser Blast, we'll forgive him for that one, The UFO Incident, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Talk about a signature piece. And that actually earned him an Academy Award nomination that he unfortunately and unjustly did not win. Red Dawn, for those of you who remember the miniseries, and then continuing on with Star Trek, beginning with the motion picture and just moving well on beyond that. In Dark Star, he built the entire spaceship based off a design by Ron Cobb. In Flash Gordon, he was the designer behind the Batwing ships that were used by the Emperor, but perhaps his signature was the mothership in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, complete with a tiny little R2-D2 that's only available if you really, really look at the model very closely, and what things he was associated with in Star Trek The Motion Picture. And then apparently, as they were going to press, they had even more information, because the very last part of the book is an update on Greg Jean, which goes through his work in Star Trek The Next Generation. And of course, as we know, he continued his association with Star Trek right up until his untimely death for us last year, and he collected during that course of time the most diverse and varied collection of Star Trek props and memorabilia ever seen. And when it was all auctioned off after he passed, I believe the total purse for the auction was like $13.6 million. Now think of that for a second. He had in his possession $13.6 million of memorabilia and props. Auction hall was probably worth vastly more than what he believed his net worth was on the day that he died. Go out in the garage, find that X-Wing that's been hiding out there that nobody knew about in a cardboard box in the corner. You might be able to get a couple million for it on eBay. Well, you get the general idea.